So please welcome on stage Felix van Delft. Greetings.
Thank you.
Good to see you again.
Great.
Like basically every year. Felix, quickly, what's the topic?
I'm going to be talking a little bit about what I do, what my job is at a racing team, Van Amersfoort Racing, as a simulator engineer. So how kind of the simulators integrate between the real world racing that we do and how we train drivers to perform at their maximum at the real racetrack.
And you know what the best part is about your segment? You're doing all of that in the presentation, so I just leave you.
Thank
So there's Felix.
Thank you.
He'll do the rest for you.
So yeah, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks of course for Sim Formula for organizing this amazing seminar and of course the event itself. Like I said, I will be talking a little bit about what I do, what racing teams in general do with simulators, and how they use that simulation, the simulators, to practice with their drivers to actually try to maximize the driver performance at eventually the real event, real track. So to start off, I want to dive a little bit into first the background of what the company does, what Van Amersfoort does, what I do, but also I want to have a little bit of an insight of what the audience here is actually interested in. I can imagine a lot of you are sim racing fans, do a lot of sim racing yourself, then probably also into motorsports. So I want to have a bit of a look, what kind of series do you guys actually follow? So let's make it a bit of a quiz. Let's see if this works. No. Yeah. Yeah, if you can click it once. Perfect. So, let's do first by show of hands. What racing series do you follow? So the first one, I think that's the most obvious one. Pretty much everyone, Formula 1. Good to see. Okay, so let's go one step down in the racing series ladder. Formula 2. About 25% of the people still left. Okay, let's go one step further down. F3. Pretty much the same people. Of course, usually F3 and F2 are on the same weekends. Then now we get to a bit more difficult, probably a bit more unknown territory for most people. Formula Regional. Yeah, still a few. Okay, good. Then the last one, Formula 4. Half Spanish Formula 4, right. Yeah, so as you can see, right, the Formula 1 everybody pretty much follows. But as you go down the ladder, less and less people actually follow it. But inversely, in the end, of course, the most racing is going on in those lower categories, especially when you look at those two lowest categories, Formula Regional and Formula 4, as you already said, Spanish F4, and there's also Italian F4. Actually, for F4, I looked it up yesterday, there's almost 20 different categories all across the world, 20 different seasons in a single year that have the title of F4 in their name. So there's a lot of driving going on in that lower categories. And of course, in the end, all those drivers want to reach that ultimate goal of Formula 1. So that brings me a little bit to what I do within the company and what the company itself does. So Van Amersfoort Racing is as the name says, a racing company, is really focused in that Formula series, the class of racing. Actually was founded this year, 50 years ago, by Felix van Amersfoort. So a special year this year for us, 2025. And in the end, our mission as a company is to, in the end, of course, win, as you can see in the picture. We want to win as a racing team. But we also, more importantly, want to help those young drivers, right? Most of them are coming from karting into autosport. And we want to help those young drivers develop themselves to eventually build their skills and bridge the gap to get into what they want in their career, to that Formula 1. So a little bit more about that mission that we had, how successful we've actually been. Again, a little bit of a quiz to see if you guys have a bit of an idea of who actually went through Van Amersfoort. So any of the current 2025 Formula 1 drivers, I can give you a hint already. There's 4 active Formula 1 drivers currently that have gone through Van Amersfoort. And then let's see, does anybody dare to take a guess? The easiest one, Max Verstappen. But there's a few more, like I said, 4 in total. Oliver Behrman. Yeah, that's also, I would say, probably the most successful one that we've had. Another Formula 1 driver that's been... No. Jos Verstappen, but he's not driving in 2025, I think, in Formula 1. I think. You never know. There's still 3 more. Charles Leclerc. Yep. Also, he was actually the year after Max Verstappen with us in Formula 3 Europe. Then Behrman, indeed, like I said, one of the most successful ones that we've had. Like I talked about, there's different Formula 4 seasons in the same season. So he won both Italian and German F4 in the same season that year. And then there's one more. He's also a rookie, or kind of a rookie this year. Sorry? Yeah, didn't drive for us though. Antonelli also didn't drive for us. There's Lawson. Yep, Lawson. Also drove F4 together with us. And then as a 5th one, maybe a bonus one, Colapinto, he's the most recent one that we had in F3, but he's reserve driver for next year, so it doesn't really count. But that gives you a bit of an idea that as a company, as Van Amersfoort Racing, we've, I would say, been relatively successful in doing that mission of making our drivers reach that top level in Formula 1. So then a bit more about myself, my role within Van Amersfoort. My official title is simulator engineer. So I don't go to the track and help the drivers on the track, but I help the team and the drivers on effectively at the factory. At the factory we have actually 4 separate simulators. A little bit later I'll also show you some pictures from what we have in our office. And my job effectively is split up in 3 different tasks. I maintain those simulators. You can imagine, of course, 4 separate simulators. A lot of hardware goes into that. Beamers, pedals, steering wheels, a lot of stuff that in the end probably sometimes will break. PCs, stuff like that is in the end very important to make sure that it's up and running, that the teams can use it whenever they want. Secondly, developing that stuff. So developing, trying to research and develop the hardware. The software side of things, of course, a lot of different racing simulations available. What should we use? What can we improve on? And software tools that the engineers can use in the end to operate the simulators themselves. And then some operation with that I do myself as well. So I help the engineers during sessions. Sometimes I do sessions myself with drivers to, like in the end, to develop them as a driver. So then I come to the topic that I really want to dive into a little bit more deeply. Why do we use simulators? Why do racing teams in general use simulators? For those of you that were here last year, it was already quite an interesting talk with Rudy van Buren, of course, who is really involved in the Formula 1 simulation kind of stuff. And that brings me also to that first, kind of the first thing or the first topic that you can use simulators for, the first use case, which is car development, car tuning, car development. And that's something that really that Formula 1 is using mostly with their simulators. Because you can imagine a Formula 1 team, they're developing their cars constantly throughout the season, and especially when there's a big regulation change, 2026 coming up. They want to try and see what will our car do when we get to the real racetrack. And of course, it's a lot of money to test in real life. So in the simulator, it's a little bit more cost efficient to test some things. So Formula 1 teams can use it really for car development. However, for a team like us, you can imagine, maybe the car itself, especially across those series that I showed, the F2 until F4, we have the same car effectively as all the other teams. We don't build our own cars. Of course, setup we can still change a little bit. So there is a little bit of tuning that we can do, but it's not like we are going to test a different front wing like Formula 1 teams would. So then you focus more on the driver development side of things. So especially for the young guys coming from karting, doing their first stuff on a real racetrack in an F4 car, they need to be taught how to actually drive that car, how the track goes, where the track goes, stuff like that. You can, of course, practice quite efficiently in a simulator before you arrive at the real track. And next to that, also for the younger drivers that are not as experienced yet, how do you actually work together with your engineer? Usually in the sessions that we do, the same engineer is running them as the engineer that they will be having on the real track. To already get them familiar with the people and the the procedures that you do when you're looking at data, how do you approach things. So stuff like that you can also really use the simulator for to practice before you arrive at the real racetrack. So then what is important in these two separate use cases? Because you can imagine that if, as a Formula 1 team, you want to have testing different front wings, you need to have different things in your simulation software to be good compared to what you need for driver development tasks. So for car tuning, what you want eventually is pretty much the best physics that you can, and the best correlation between what the simulator is giving you, the data that's coming out of the simulator, and the data that's getting out of your real car. In the end, if you want to use your simulator to test setup things or test different front wings, you also want, of course, to make sure that the change that you do in the simulator would be similar, or at least as good as possible, as close as possible to what that change would also reflect in the real life. And most importantly also, with that, if you're testing changes in your simulator on your car, you want to, of course, in the end see if that change makes the car quicker. But to do that, of course, you want to have the driver that's driving the car in the simulator be as consistent as possible, fast, but as consistent as possible, because you can imagine that if you do a session over an entire day, and the first run that you do, the driver is still trying to figure out where the track goes, and then the last session of the day, he finally figured it out, and it's going to be difficult to know if the part that you're testing in your simulator actually made the car quicker, or if it's just the driver that's getting better. When you look at driver development, the physics itself, right, the data that you get out of the simulator doesn't necessarily need to match exactly with what your real car is giving you. As long as the driver has the feeling that the car feels as it does in the real world, should be good enough. Of course, you want to still have good physics, but you don't have to be as good as you need to be if you look at car tuning, car development. Of course, you still want to match the speeds, the top speeds, the corner speeds. You don't want to arrive Monza turn 1 20 kilometers an hour faster than you would be doing in real life. So there is some tuning with that, but in the end also visuals of the track are much more important than actual data that is coming out of the simulator. So like I said, visuals is important because in the end, when you're trying to use your simulator to develop your driver for a real event, things like braking points are going to be very crucial for them. So especially at the Formula 1 events, so where Formula 2 and Formula 3 are going, there's of course a lot of advertisement banners all around the racetracks, and racing drivers often use those kind of banners, those kind of signs, as braking references, steering references. So when you're training them in your simulator, you want to try to get that as well, as close as possible to what they will see when they arrive on the real track. And of course, lastly, you want to try to make sure that the feeling that they have through the steering wheel in your simulator, and also, most importantly, the braking force that they need to apply to the brake pedal, matches what they eventually will have to do in the real car. Again, especially for Formula 4, it's a big step from karting, where, well, braking is not such a big problem. Then they arrive in Formula 4, where they have to press the brake pedal by 100, even up to sometimes 140 kilograms. So that's a big step, especially for those young guys, again, usually only 14, 15, 16 years old when they arrive at Formula 4. All right, so now we have a little bit of an idea of what is important in the different kinds of simulations that you want to do in the different two separate topics. Then there's different kinds of software that you can use. These are the most commonly used, I would say, by racing teams or training centers that do simulation. And the two that are focused mainly on that car development are Cruden, it's a Dutch company actually, and rFactor Pro. Usually for F1 teams, those are the kind of softwares that they use, and most oftenly it's integrated very closely with their homemade simulation tools that they use. And then for driver development, often you see that softwares are used that you can pretty much buy off the shelf yourself. So rFactor, Assetto Corsa, Automobilista, softwares like that you can use at home are often what we use as well. But in the end, also exactly what you can get for free out of those games. So the cars and the content that you get is not exactly what we use. Like I said, we can tune a lot as well ourselves. So the car physics we're tuning, the track models we're tuning, had to, again, try to match it as closely as possible. So a lot of work as a job for me goes into that. So to give you a bit of an idea of what it looks like at our place, like I said, we have 4 separate simulators in our factory. These are the first 3. The hardware that we have, it's actually an old Formula Renault tub that we have with, of course, the steering wheel in there and the pedals. Noise-cancelling headphones to make sure that the drivers can't hear themselves scream at each other when they make a mistake. And beamers, 3 separate beamers, 4K beamers to effectively span 180 degrees all the way around. And then at the back you can see a desk where the engineer can sit, see what the driver is doing, see some data as well. This is a little bit more up close. As you can see, is pretty much the view all the way around. This is what the engineer will be seeing. Maybe complaining about braking a little bit too early. Should drive faster in the end. And a big red button, as you can see in the middle there, for in case they spin around. So we smash that button as hard as possible to make sure that they don't break their wrists. Because, like I said, we match the steering feel as well. And especially in Formula 3, Formula 2, that steering, they don't have power steering there, is pretty tough. So they have to really work a lot to work that steering wheel. But of course, if they spin around, then you want to make sure that that force doesn't do any harm to them in the end. This is then the simulator that we have upstairs. It's focused on Formula 2. So we built that actually 2 years ago to focus more on the Formula 2 efforts of the team. It's a little bit bigger. In the end, the hardware, pedal-wise, steering-wise, is similar as what we have downstairs. But the tub, so the chassis is actually an old Formula 2 chassis that we used. And then slightly bigger screen, slightly bigger beamers to allow for a little bit more realism, a little bit more feel for the driver to feel like you're actually sitting in a real car and can look out of the car itself. Quiz question: which track is this? Zandvoort, easy one. It's a little bit more up close, as you can see. The top is effectively just adjusted to make it easy for us to integrate all the hardware into it, and then this would be, in the end, what you would see as a driver out of screen. Of course, it's a little bit tough to justify how this would look with just a single picture. When you're sitting in there, of course, you can look around, and of course, the halo now is kind of in the way, but also in the simulator, you don't really notice it. So just briefly to go through what a simulator session looks like when you're at Van Amersfoort Racing. Usually, when the drivers prepare for a race event, they do 1, sometimes 2 full days of testing in the simulator. They arrive at the beginning in the morning. Usually we go through a few things, track-specific things that they should focus at, things that they should look at, corners that might be interesting to try certain techniques at. Maybe you can try a different line here or try braking a little bit later. Stuff like this that we mentioned beforehand. Then we usually look at some reference data. So often, of course, we have data from either previous years or previous sim sessions that we have with the driver, and then we can look at what was done before and how should you attack this session. Then jump in, do some, let's say, familiarization laps, get used to the car, get used to the track. Do that probably for 2-3 sessions, look at the data with the engineers, and then we probably usually also then again move to a bit more event-specific things that we want to look at. So especially in F3, F2, there's a lot of stuff going on with tires, warming the tires. How do you warm your tires for your qualifying session? So we can go through these kind of things as well. And in the end, because we have 3 separate ones, we can have them not just drive a single lap as fast as they can, we can also make them drive against each other. So practice races. How do you race? Where do you overtake? How do you defend? And of course, also, especially in the lower categories, there tend to be quite a lot of safety cars here and there. So how do you restart? When do you accelerate? How do you warm your tires during a safety car procedure? Things like that, of course, also very valuable to do during these kind of sessions. So that hopefully tells you a little bit about that background, my background, what I do within the company, and how companies use simulation to, in the end, maximize the driver performance on the real track. Thank you. And of course, if there's any questions, please.
It's quite common these days for racing tracks to change their curbstones and sometimes even layouts throughout the season.
Yep.
A good example was the first chicane at Monza and pretty much every curb at Imola.
Pretty much.
How quickly can you adapt as a racing team, and how keen are you to have these last details, and where do you get the data from? Do you speak with the FIA? Do you measure curbs yourself? How does it work?
The added benefit, of course, as a company like us that is quite wide, so we have F4, FECA, F2, F3, that there is a lot of racing going on, and a lot of these teams go in different events to the different tracks. So often, either we have data from sources that we have that we can use, or, for example, a team that has been there already can give us pictures from the track walk that they did. They will usually take close-up pictures from all the curbs, and then, we can implement that within, I would say, a couple of weeks into track model to be used quite quickly in the sim. And especially those details like curbs are very important to have accurately in the sim.
Hi, Felix. Can you tell something about your road to Van Amersfoort?
Yeah, so I started off almost 3 years ago now, in 2022, as a kind of an internship. Wasn't like a proper internship official through university, but something that I did next to my studies was a kind of remote support engineering role. Van Amersfoort stepped into F3, F2 in 2022, and they were looking for some extra help to prepare the engineers, prepare the drivers, prepare documents, analyze data, analyze historic data. So I started with that, did that for 2 years, and then in June or July this year, a role opened up for the simulator engineer, and fit my background perfectly. I'm a big fan of sim racing myself, so in the end, that was a logical choice to go there.
Felix, first of all, thanks for your talk. Everyone is talking about AI nowadays, and I can imagine not exactly for driver development, but the car development. In what way will AI be maybe the next big thing instead of a person driving the car?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know. We, like I said, we focus on the driver development mostly. So something that is difficult for me to judge. But like I mentioned, for that car development, indeed, it's very important to have a consistent driver. And I can imagine that AI at some point gets to a point that they're as good or maybe sometimes even better than a real driver to just do the same exact lap time all the time around. And then it might be easier to use that to tune a car. But in the end, I think also what is then difficult, especially also for F1 teams, you want to also have a feel for what the car is doing. And I think, at least at this point, and probably also still for a bit of time, the real driver will probably be more useful to communicate with the engineers how the car really feels in the end. Anyone else? No? Okay.
Hi, Felix.
Hi.
My name is Colin. I'm all the way from Texas in America. Pretty far way away. Big question I have, actually. Why don't you guys use motion for your simulators?
It's a great topic. Yeah, motion. In the end, for driver, to say it like this, motion is a tough thing to get right, especially for cars like F2, F3. Right, in the end, you're in corners. You have sustained Gs of 2-3 Gs, which you never can simulate in a simulator, except if you have like a hall that all the cars are parked in and use that entire hall. Right, you can use motion to probably get like a feel for curbs, stuff like that. That might be interesting, but quite often what I see with like all the swaying stuff, I think is more off-putting for a driver, especially when you really focus on driving techniques, steering, braking points. Is more off-putting for a driver than just having a static simulator. In the end, there is some things like the swaying motion that you see some of the simulators around here as well having to try and feel for that oversteer, because that's something that really lacks in a simulator. Of course, you don't have that butt feel of what the rear of the car is effectively doing. But I think all the big bumping and swaying in the end doesn't add that much as a driver in the use case that we have. All right.
Adding to what our friend just said there, do you think in the future there could be some sort of simulation to give you the G-force and like astronauts get in their training?
Well, I think in the end it's difficult, because especially those sustained Gs, in the end it's just maths not adding up, because you would just need too much space to be able to contain those sustained Gs for the same time. I mean, effectively, you would almost, in theory, need as much space as the build track has. So, tricky, yeah, tricky. I mean, of course, the drivers physically train still in ways that they can simulate those kind of G-forces, but I think to combine that during like actual simulation track driving is really difficult to get, especially for those higher G-forces.
People push me towards it.
Yeah.
Hi. All right, yeah, I think we're done. Anyone with any question left? They all want to know now where to find simulators to actually drive.
Yeah,
you know.
save all of them.
That's